message. To the top, ragamuffin keeps striving in every way. International, what they call me international. When me ride palm with them in the move, but the rhythm and I come down crucial. And me ride palm with them and then we sit down steady. Body me on the place, I with the one Jamal skinny.
Yes. What is up, everybody? Joshua Casper back at you with Plugin Boutique. Got another dev stream for you today. Please let me know if you can hear me. I'm running the show solo tonight, so I'm going to need all the help I can get from you, the beautiful chat. Also, let me know where you're tuning in from. South Africa, that's nice. Germany. Oh, you guys are already doing it. I hadn't even asked yet. UK, what's up, Chris? F in the chat. Something has started. So this is the problem. We're on like a 30-second delay, so I have to sit here. Oh, okay, great. Yeah, I didn't want to bring my guest out if you can't hear us. Anyway, yeah, mixing and mastering today. Well, more on the mastering side. We're going to be mastering a track start to finish with my friend Tom from Mastering the Mix. Absolute legend. Not only because he's an incredible engineer. He's making some incredible plugins, and we're going to see quite a few of them today. But he has allowed us to just give one of them away to literally everybody on the stream today. So I'm going to post in the chat right now a coupon code, which you can use on Plugin Boutique for Expose2. And everybody who uses the coupon code will get it for free. How does that sound? Let's get some fires in the chat for Tom and all he does. Go ahead and post that code in 5, 4. I did it. I already did it. I'm not counting down. That's lame. Nice. So it's EXPB100. Use that at checkout on Plugin Boutique for Expose2, and you'll get it 100% off. And with that, why don't we welcome our guest, Tom. Tom, how you doing?
Hi, Joshua. Very well, thank you. How you doing?
Oh, very excited for today. I enjoy every time we get together. I always learn. We have fun. We laugh. Sometimes we cry, but I always learn something, and that's all I really care about in my lifetime. So
Good.
For the people who are joining us who might not know, can you let people know a little bit about yourself, about mastering the mix, and then what we're going to be doing on stream today? Monologue it for me. Nice.
Sure. So my name's Tom. I founded Mastering the Mix, and we create plugins that help producers solve hard problems that they face in the studio. They're just trying to make those difficult workflows a little bit easier, a little bit more straightforward, so you can get great results in a more streamlined, quick way. But we do it in a way that we like to keep people in control. So you'll see throughout the mastering walkthrough today that the plugins are there, but you're always steering them. You're always in control. You're always using your artistic direction. And that's how we're going to get good results, by using our discretion and using our ears.
Love that. And we'll be doing it with the tools that you've made to make that process in everyone's life a lot easier, right?
Correct. Yes.
Yeah.
There's a few other great plugins from other companies thrown in as well, but focusing on some of the ones from Mastering the Mix.
Beautiful. All right. Well, let's flip over to the DAW and jump right in, if you don't mind.
Cool.
And I'm flipping now. Give it 5, 4. We're good now. Go ahead.
We're good. These countdowns.
No, so
yeah.
when I flip from our kind of interview / conversation side to the DAW takes like 2 seconds to pop up. So I didn't want you to jump right in and not let people see what's going on. But we're good now.
Yeah, those first 2 seconds are always packed of value. So good idea. So I've already set everything up here, so we're kind of jumping straight into it. So I'll quickly run through how we got to this position. So we've got a track here that we're going to be working on. It sounds terrible, but that's really just to show you what the plugins can do and how to solve a really difficult problem. So we've got the session set up here. I've got this part of the track looped here, which is just the richest part of the track, the loudest part. It has the low end and the high end, and I have all my plugins already engaged. And this is just something that I do for a workflow thing. There are some plugins here that are kind of set and forget, and some that are kind of set to a position where it's like a good starting point to tweak from. And some of them have no processing, and this is just the way that I like to do things. So you've got the mastering chain here. The BPM is quite simply that I just used that to get the BPM to begin with. We can get rid of that for focus. And then on the master out channel, we've got levels, which is going to be monitoring the technical details. And we've also got reference, which is going to allow me to compare my mix to the reference track. So I've already loaded in the reference track, and I've looped the loudest section of it so I can compare back and forth. And then the final setup here is I have reference send here, and that goes on the beginning before any of the mastering plugins, and that sends the signal into reference here, into reference send, and I can level match this. So even though it goes through all of this processing, I can jump back and forth between the unmastered track and the mastered track. So that's the setup. And then in terms of, we just have some extra bits here just to send the audio through to our lovely viewers. That's the general setup. So JC, any questions at this point about the setup, or are we all good?
Pretty straightforward. I appreciate you running through it. And that actually, absolutely, if you have a question, at Plugin Boutique, everybody in the chat, and I will give it to Tom so he can give us an answer here on the stream today. But for now, Tom, we are good to go. I've put the coupon code and the information in the top right of the screen for everybody. That's all for me. Cool. Go ahead, Tom. Keep going.
Cool. So what I like to do when I'm mastering tracks, we've got this set up now. I like to have the loudness more or less in place so that I can hear how everything's going to go through, how everything's going to react. So for example, if you want a really heavy low end, but then you want it to be really loud at the end, and you dial in more low end, and then you start limiting it quite heavily, then you're going to find that it could start to break down or distort. So I like to have the loudness, the plugins that introduce loudness set up quite early on. So even at this point, I have the compressor and the limiter kind of going. So let's have a little listen, and we're going to set up the limiter and the compressor simultaneously to get a good amount of level, and I'll talk you through what I'm doing. So let's start with the compressor. So what am I trying to do here? I'm looking at the needle. I'm seeing how much reduction I'm getting. And what I'm doing is, again, all of this is kind of set up for how I like it. I'm just using the Logic stock compressor here. And I'm going to be messing around with the threshold because that's the only thing that really needs to happen. So here you can see at 0, there's no compression happening. And as I start bringing it down, you can see the needle starting to move. What I'm looking to do is get that needle coming back to 0 after the transients. And that's just going to clamp down on the transients a little bit, but not start squashing the overall sound unnecessarily. So you see this movement that we've got going on here. If I bring the threshold right down, we have more or less the same movement, but it's just happening in this range rather than this range. So here we go. So I'm going to bring this back up to tweaking it there. So we're only getting about 1 decibel of reduction here. We can increase the ratio a touch, but we want to keep it between 1.4 to 2, really, to get the kind of nice glued sound.
That's
so let's bring the gain back up and have a little listen.
Tom. Just so I can recap what you've just done there is, for this first and maybe only compressor in the chain, when a kick or a snare happens, we want there to be reduction, but then when it's done, we want it to go back to 0. And that's the point of this particular compressor in the signal path.
Correct. It's just taking the edge off those transients.
What's the edge of, we don't want edge on the transient, or?
When I say the edge, that's a really good question. Let me just dive into that in a bit more detail. So when you have, if I zoom into the track here, you can see that you've got some of these. This is basically what's poking through the mix, and it's just a little bit of the kick and the snare coming through. And you can see the rest of the transients are kind of going around here. What can happen is these transients can push the limiter harder later on. So what we're doing is we're just controlling the signal a bit, and this means that the limiter is not going to have to work so hard later on down the line. And so it's gonna be a little bit more natural sounding, a little bit more transparent, less chance of it the mix breaking down at that point. So this is kind of like doing the compressor first to set it up for the limiter later. And you have a little bit of control as well over the attack and releases, so you can kind of shape how you want because the transients aren't so snappy, so we can kind of accentuate that in the sense that you can adjust the attack and release to allow that characteristic to be maintained in this circumstance.
Gotcha. I mean, what's the difference between what we're doing here and, say, using a clipper for something similar?
You could totally use a clipper for something similar. I have been recently using clippers for the same thing here. Okay. And it just comes down to workflow and preference. There's differences sonically, of course.
Right.
And so my personal experience is that with some clippers, they can sound a little bit destructive. Some sound really great, and it can also be program dependent. So I've found that this compressor works really well for me across a large range of material. I've also been using the gold clipper recently. I forget who Schwab Digital, I think. So I've been using that for a similar approach, and that's great. Similar kind of thing. So it's just kind of taking from a very subtle perspective, taking the edge off those transients.
Understood. Thanks for clearing that up.
Cool. But it's very straightforward. So this is kind of it. It's very straightforward. It adds a little bit of glue, but it has an effect on the overall loudness. So it's going to slightly reduce the overall loudness. And if we jump in now to the limiter, so this one is one of our plugins. This is Limiter by Mastering the Mix. And I'm listening to the loudest part of the track. And now I'm going to click one of the presets. So here we have loads of presets from CD, Club, Crazy Loud, SoundCloud, Spotify Loud. So whatever kind of like your destination of your track is in terms of, where you want it to, the loudness, what you want to optimize the loudness for, you can select that. So here we'll just do all around, and this is just, an all around good option. And here what we're going to have is on the right hand side, we have the level meters. And if you're within these kind of brackets, you're in the green. If you go outside them, it goes red. So for example, here we have it's short-term LUFS, and if we start going above -6 short-term LUFS, it's going to turn red and warn us. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to press play, and I'm going to analyze the audio. So now it's taking like a snapshot of how loud it is and the gain adjustments that are needed. So as you can see, this is the range here, the white section behind the slider that would put us in this loudness range here. So if I wanted it on the louder side, I'd push it up to the top, and here it kind of corresponds with what we're seeing in the loudness meters, and I've just pushed it over the edge there, and it's warned me. And if I want it to be a bit more dynamic, I'm more on this end of the spectrum where it's at -12. So this range corresponds to the metering here. And we want to keep it in this range again. So this is going to be very dynamic down at -12 short-term LUFS. And as you can see here, there's actually no limiting going on. And as I start pushing it into the limiter, you can now see the reduction here. We're getting around -3, and of gain reduction, more or less. But it's coming in at -6 LUFS. So that's actually, this is great. So the transients are very much under control. At -3, the limiter's not really going to fall down, and it's going to sound pretty good. So that tells us that the compression, compression is working nicely. It's keeping a lot of the transients under control. So that's the gain aspect of setting the right kind of level. We also have the ceiling here. So that's the point at which no audio goes above that. And we've got true peak limiting turned off right now. We can turn it on or off. There's two schools of thought here. On the one hand, true peak limiting does lead to greater reduction. And it's a complex topic, but in a nutshell, when audio comes through speakers, you can take a true peak analysis of that when the audio is transcoded from digital to audio, to analog, sorry, and basically the peak can increase. Now, when you take that analysis and apply it to limiting, that means that it's analyzing an increased peak to bring down, which means additional limiting is applied, and it can almost be like 1 or 2 decibels of additional limiting. So it can sound a little bit more clamped down. So to make it really straightforward for people, my personal suggestion is if you're shooting for really loud music to be played in the club, you could turn it off. And if you're aiming for audio to be streamed online, then it can be helpful to keep it turned on, especially if it's being transcoded to a lossy format such as MP3 or AAC or whatever. And getting the correct headroom for that it can be very helpful. So that's loudness. There's some complicated topics there, and we kind of condensed them. So if there's any questions later, we can revisit those.
I have a question. Why is this your normal sequence of events here for mastering a track?
It is, yeah. It's a little bit convoluted, but I like to do the loudness first.
Interesting. So is that because you assume you won't have to do too much out, with EQ or any other effects, or?
No, I regardless of how much work there is to do on the track, I'll still take this approach because it helps me highlight some of the issues that can come up. So for example, once I have the loudness that I'm shooting for, I know that whatever the changes I make are going to have to work around those parameters. I was mastering a track earlier today where I set it to around, the client wanted a loud master at around -7 LUFS short term. So not about 1 decibel quieter than the average of kind of like loud releases. And so I set it to that level, and I realized that actually it was accentuating clicks and pops. It was like a hip hop record, and it was kind of pushing through a little bit more. And I wasn't able to rectify those in the master itself. And the limiter was, like I said, accentuating them. So I made all the changes and came back and said, actually, the limiter loudness has to come down an extra decibel. So it's just kind of like a nice starting position to kind of get you set up to see how the rest of the chain is going to sound in the context of the final loudness.
Gotcha.
But things are obviously subject to change.
And that's what I'm saying is like you'll come back to this when
Yes.
everything else is made, but this is just so you can hear what it will sound like, I guess.
Yeah, I will, but I also like to do things that will kind of maintain the loudness level, as you'll see later as I go through the tonal balance changes. Our plugins have built-in loudness matching, so that if I boost the low end by 4 decibels, it will calculate the overall change in the loudness and allow me to adjust the gain accordingly. So I can do loudness matching across, and actually this should be more or less unaffected.
Nice.
Again, this is kind of why the workflow works for me personally.
We got a couple of
So,
questions, if you don't mind, before
yeah.
we continue on.
Of course, yeah.
One person asked, and I forget, the scroll has gone way past. Are your plugins M1 or M2 or M3 compatible?
Compatible and optimized.
Whoa, love that.
Ooh.
That's a little extra. And then this is a question for me. Where do you put the code on Plugin Boutique? There's a page in the checkout process that asks for a promo code. You put it there, you hit apply, and it should get 100% off Exposed 2, courtesy of Mastering the Mix. Use EXPB100 at checkout. Plugin Boutique, it's yours. Everybody wins. Thanks again, Tom, for letting us do that. That's pretty cool.
Well, you guys are amazing, and Plugin Boutique rocks. So I love collaborating with you guys on anything and everything. So
nice,
pleasure.
Love that.
And your customers are amazing as well. I I get the opportunity to speak with them when they need some support, and they're always very kind and gracious.
That's true. I on the streams here, we've never had I actually don't think we've ever had anyone we had to ban. Everybody's super cool, and it's really great to see on the internet, especially these days, just to have such a positive community. So thanks for saying that, Tom.
I'm very grateful. I'm very grateful for that. I've always found it just fascinating that the audio community is so kind and gracious. So yeah, thanks guys. Thanks for being amazing.
We will show a little bit of Exposed 2 towards the end of the stream. We'll show you around, see what it is, but let's continue with mastering this track.
Yeah. In a nutshell, Exposed 2 is basically a quality control application. So what would happen for me is when I was mastering tracks for my clients, I remember leaving stuff on the output channel, like, for example, monitor or speaker correction, and I'd send it over and it would be like -4 decibels, and it would have a weird EQ curve on it. They'd be like, what have you done to my song? And I was like, I'm so sorry, that's not the real thing. So I was like, I have to bring it back into the project and check it, and now I want to run everything like through my metering stuff, whatever. So I was like, okay, if I can do this quickly, it makes more sense. So Expose is, I'll just really quickly show you. If a track I mastered earlier, if I have a track that comes in, I can really quickly in 2 seconds analyze it and go, we're good to go. So I can see the integrated LUFS, the short-term LUFS, the true peak, the normal peak, looking at any issues, and any issues are highlighted in red. So here, this is showing me that there's a very quick phase issue, and that's happening there.
Oh, it's so small you can't even see. I was going to say, like,
you can just about see it. Yeah, I can see it on my screen. I'm not sure if it's translating through, but basically, it, you know, when there's just, it might be an introductory synth or something like that, that that could be panned off to the left or is doing some phasing, but in the context of the whole mix, there's no phase issues showing up. So, and if there was an issue, then I could click into it and see what's going on. And I'd get, if you click the feedback button, you also can see, okay, so
love it.
It's giving me an example of how I can solve the phase issues here. So if you had any issues with loudness or peak or dynamic range or loudness range, it would explain how you can solve that. And then just quickly down here, we have the, let's see, this is the tonal balance, the compare EQ chart, and I'm just going to get, this says I need a good preset for this to compare it. So let's try, this one is okay. Okay, it's quite a dark track because it's a hip hop track. Let's see.
We can't hear it though, remember?
Yeah, I can't hear it, that's all right.
Yeah, that's my fault, everybody. How we run the stream. We use the Listen To plugin. Shout out to them for allowing us to do it. It's Audio Movers, streaming high quality audio, and we've got it inside the DAW. And actually, this brings up a good question from JH Studio, and that is Expose a plugin or a standalone application? And it's a standalone, and it's not inside Logic, which is why we can't hear it. We can only see it. That's
yeah. But the tonal balancing, you can load in your own reference track and then compare how the tonal balance compares to it. So, for example, comparing it to a pop rap track, our master here is more or less the same in the low end, a little bit more in these kind of low mids, around 400 hertz. You can see the hertz down the bottom and the scale on the left-hand side. And then it's much darker. So here, as we go up towards the high frequencies, I can change the scale here. I can see that in the high frequencies, it gets down to like -6. So there's no hi-hats in this track, I don't think. So that's why that bit is tailing off. And so it's different in that regard. If you had a reference track that was a really good representation of the sound you're going for, you might find that the whole line here is within ±3 decibels. That would indicate that you're very close sonically to these things. So it's super helpful. I mean, imagine if you were, one of the reasons why we made this one was if you're doing an album and you wanted to have a consistent sound, you could load them all in and see if the tonal balance was consistent between them. There's things like that you can do that make it quite helpful. So anyway, that's Expose in a nutshell, but it's more for when we've finished the track, so we can dive into this at the end.
Wonderful. So, so you're going to throw this in cool. Expose towards the end as well.
That's what I would do. Yeah, if I was mastering this for someone, I would quickly run it through Expose to make sure I was happy with how it was all sounding and that there was no weird things left on the master channel or whatever. And it's kind of like a sanity check to make sure, okay, this is good to go. I'm not going to be embarrassed. I'm not going to upload something that sounds wrong or it could have issues later on. The idea is that it exposes the issues before it's too late.
Love it. Absolutely. And you get it for free. Look at the coupon code is up there in the top right of the screen for those who are just coming. If you're here, welcome. We're with Tom from Mastering the Mix, and we're mastering a track from start to finish.
Okay, so jumping back into the track here, we've got the loudness stuff is now being covered. The kind of the basic loudness stuff is done. Now, we haven't even really listened to the track yet. So now, before we start doing any tweaking, we have to train our ears as to what is a good sound. What are we shooting for? So I've got reference here, and I've got a reference track, and I've looped the loudest section so that I'm comparing apples to apples. And I've level matched it because that's incredibly important when you're comparing audio. So what's going to happen is my reference track, the gain of the reference track is going to adjust in real time alongside what's being heard, like coming into reference. So I just press play here. I've got the gain down so we can't. So right now you can see the gain of the reference is being reduced by about 1 decibel as we go back and forth. So I can jump back and forth there. I'm going to bring it up so you guys can have a listen. So our track sounds pretty terrible. There's some resonance going on in there. It's quite a lot of low end. It sounds muddy, lots of problems. So, and what I can use here, this is the level line in reference. And this is a really straightforward metric that we can use to help guide our mastering decisions. So I'm just going to, so what we can see here, you can see the scale is jumping between 5 and 10 because it's kind of, I'll just, do a little screenshot so you can see that. So we've got it in. I've just pressed Control so I can do a screenshot of the tonal balance there. ±5. So each of these lines here represents 1 decibel, and we have the frequencies down the bottom. And this line that we see is the exact EQ curve that we want to introduce to the track to make it sound like our reference track. Okay, so what does that mean? It means that the original track that we're working on, it needs to be reduced by around 1 decibel up to about 100 hertz. And then once we get past 500 hertz, it's a little bit of a nudge up. And then once we get to 3000 hertz, it's about a 4 decibel lift. So this really correlates to what we're listening to as well. So we're hearing, okay, I need to make my master brighter. I need to control the low end a bit. And this is all, the algorithm level matches everything as well. So it helps kind of, with this calculation, so you can make a little bit of adjustment in the low end, a little bit of adjustment in the high end, and it's going to sound great. You don't have to exactly match what you're seeing here. I like to take it as kind of like big snapshots. So I'm seeing this information in the low end of like a reduction of 1 decibel, and this information in the high end of an increase of around 4 decibels. And then it's going to be up to us to kind of, how do we want to make those changes? If I was mixing the track, maybe I would actually turn the bass down itself, or perhaps put an EQ on the kick, and I might use gain adjustments on the individual channels to achieve these a greater high end. And again, you don't have to match all of these little curves, because our track and the reference track have sonic differences. They have different samples used, different instrumentation, and anything within plus minus 3 decibels is actually pretty close sonically. So this is kind of just a good idea to kind of tune your ears, get set up for what the sonic target for what you want to achieve with your track, and hopefully this visual should help just steer you in the right direction.
So any
questions, JC?
This plugin, it doesn't do anything except show you it like A/B's almost the thing. It actually doesn't like manipulate the sound at all. It's just giving you actionable information that you can then use in your mastering process.
Exactly. It just helps give you a destination. I think that's something that producers of all levels struggle with generally, is knowing how to get from A to B. So having a track that you're like, okay, what needs to change? What needs to be adjusted here to make it sound great? And a really efficient and effective way of understanding that is to find a great sounding reference track that either has commercial success or that you know sounds amazing in the car, in the club, on your phone, on the earbuds, everywhere. And you go, okay, that sounds amazing everywhere. I'm going to use that as my goal, as my target, to say, I'm going to try and manipulate my track to have comparable sonic qualities to this, so that I know it's going to be successful in the same playback systems.
Gotcha.
And this facilitates that. So, for example, you take away the level match aspect of it, and it's almost impossible to compare two audio files, because when something is louder, it can sound bassier, and it can sound like it has more clarity as well. So our ear kind of tricks us. So, for example, let's say you're working on a track and it's quiet, and you compare it to a track that's loud. You might dramatically increase the bass and increase the high end to try and match the kind of depth and clarity of the reference track, but it's a bias that you get because of the loudness difference. So when tracks are level matched, it means you can make the correct adjustments, and you'll actually get closer to the sound that you're shooting for. So it's really important to have the reference tracks and to have them level matched.
Be Loaded is wondering, Tom, if you can add more than one reference track.
Yes, you can. You can add up to 12. Just click add reference track. You can just drop them in, and you can have up to 12.
Love
you
that.
can create loops, and
Nice. Let's keep rocking. What's next?
Let's keep rocking. So now we have in our mind a sonic target. So we need a little bit less bass, a little bit more high end. And we're going to keep coming back to referencing this track. But now I'm going to jump into one of the things that I like is the Ozone Imager, and it just sits on my master channel doing this more or less on every single track that I do. So we've got 4 bands here, and the low frequency is everything below about 100. I can bring them down a little bit. Anything between 0 and minus 100 is cool. I don't know if you want to start boosting the width of the low end from there, but I have it around here, and then boosting. I leave this kind of low mid range as it is, and then boosting the upper from 1 kilohertz and above. That can really help add some more clarity, but it can also introduce more brightness and harshness. So in the context of this track where we need more high end, this is fine, and these moderate settings can be left as they are. And if I need to revisit them, I will, but this is more or less a set and forget.
Really? That seems quite...
It is.
That seems like a lot for that really far upper frequency one.
Yeah. It's quite subtle. I mean, you can go on, there's some different settings here. If I start turning these things on, then it can be too much. It would be way too much and introduce issues. So these are, in my opinion, I just keep them turned off, and it's actually quite subtle. Let's have a listen to how subtle it is. It just gives a little bit of lift to the sides in the high frequencies. So, like I said, very subtle, very simple, and it's kind of a good set and forget. And again, it comes at the start of my chain, and if I have to revisit it, because I need to then adjust these things first, these other plugins, to see if I actually like what it's doing later down the line as well. But yeah, set and forget there.
Understood.
So the next thing that I would do is I'm going to jump into one of our other plugins, Reso, and let's get rid of these. I'll start from scratch and have a listen to some resonances and see if I can improve the sound of the mix. What I'll do here is I'll use the sweep feature, and I can do that by holding control and moving around the spectrum, and it's going to just lift out frequencies here, and I can double click to create a dynamic node that's going to help reduce these frequencies. So let's have a listen. So that's what's being removed now. And everything that goes above the node is being removed. It's like a dynamic, if you see the audio that goes above the node is removed. So I can click control and lock the frequency and lower that to increase the reduction. You can see the reduction here has increased. I like to keep it fairly subtle. So I keep it more or less near this kind of line of the audio, not too far down. And one of the nice things about Reso is that the Q, which you can see at the top of it's listed up here when I hover over. So that's a Q of 36, got a Q of 34, and a Q of 29. Sounds really horrible. That's optimized based on the frequency. So if I'm over here, the Q is 5, and I move it over here, and we've got 9, so it's optimized for the frequency itself. So it just makes it's a really nice, easy workflow for me. So wherever I introduce the node, the Q's of 39, that's optimized for the frequency where it's at. So it's going to sound nice and transparent. And it can have quite a dramatic effect. So I'll do a before and after here, so you can hear just what 3 dynamic nodes has done to the sound. So that's off. For anyone listening with monitors and headphones, I hope you're hearing that. It kind of just alleviates those really nasty frequencies. These are the ones you're listening for. Try to pick those out. So those kind of resonances can creep into your mix when, synths come together, or a weird room node, when you're recording guitar or vocals or whatever, and they can be either very subtle or they can be very significant. But when everything kind of combines together, it can become problematic and just sound fatiguing. So I like to address these on the master like this as well. And it just leads to a much more pleasant and less fatiguing listening experience. So again, that's something that I do before I go into EQing or anything else.
Tom, I got a question before you move on. Actually, 2 questions. Chris Manson is wondering if you put reference at the end of the mastering chain, or where does it belong?
Reference goes after the mastering chain. Yep. So here we have the mastering chain. So here we've got reference send, which sends the signal into reference as like a pre-master, so that we can listen to all of the effects that's going on. And then you have all your mastering chain, and then after that, we've got our metering plugin, levels, and reference.
Gotcha. And I had a question about Reso.
Mm-hmm.
How do you know which one sounds bad? Because if you solo any tight band along the spectrum, it's going to sound kind of crappy. So how do you know which one is actually going to be beneficial to remove or subdue from the mix?
That's a really, really good question, because like you say, when you boost any frequency like that, it sounds basically rubbish. But I found that there are some that sound disproportionately rubbish. So when you're kind of floating through them, and we made a point with the sweep feature to make it not unbearably not unbearable in terms. So it's only a subtle, I think it's like a 3 dB boost or anything. It's more to just hear what you're knocking out. And again, it comes down to which if you introduce the node, does it sound better? Is it making the track sound better? So I find that very helpful to kind of sweep through and find the ones that sound disproportionately worse, and often the ones that are out of key with the audio itself. So if you're like working on a guitar, for example, and you think you found a resonance, but it's actually very much in the key of the music itself, you know, it's resonating in a musical way, then it might be detrimental to remove that or to subdue it.
Have you seen scalar EQ?
I've seen it, yeah.
Have you used it?
I don't think I've used it.
Oh, we got to get you a copy.
I need to check it out. but educate me.
No,
How can it help me with this?
So in EQ, well, we're just talking about whether or not the resonant was in the key of the track. So scalar EQ makes the frequency bands in the key. You set the key, or it can detect the key, and then the nodes will be in the key, and it will never be out of the key. So even if you sweep across the frequency range, the nodes will only pop up on the frequencies of the notes in the scale that you're working in.
It's a cool plugin.
Cool plugin.
Very cool plugin. Very cool plugin.
Plugin boutique. Nice one.
There is another feature here in Reso where it can calculate the targets. So it will look at statistically which resonances poke out more in the mix than the neighboring ones. So if I'll just show you how that works quickly. So we're playing the audio. I'll click calculate targets. It's going to have a listen to the audio and look to see if it can find any of the resonances that are sticking out disproportionately. And when that's done, they'll show up here. I don't know why it's not doing it. Let's try again. Oh, good. Could be something that's going on. I'm just going to quickly reinstantiate that to see if we can get that going again. Let's go. Calculate targets. Calculating targets.
Yeah, it usually happens pretty fast, doesn't it?
There you go. So there you go. So now it's picked out all of these ones, and you can basically initiate the ones that you want to do, or enable all targets, and you can drag them all together, bring them up and down. So these are like the statistical ones. It can be very effective. I personally like to do the sweep through myself, because it's just the most musical way to do it. So if I'm just going to very quickly do that again to show you how I do it. I can see them poking through here now. Like visually, I can see there's a couple there. So let's bring the volume back up and just show you one more time. So I'm going to sweep through using Control and double click to create the nodes. So that's what I'm removing. Just gets rid of that annoying whistle in your ear. So yeah, very helpful for that. So there's Reso. I like to do that before doing the other tonal balance stuff as well, because it kind of, now I feel like, so now from this point, I'm moving on to bass room and mix room. And this is kind of like, in a very basic, simple mastering chain, now all that's left is just fixing the tonal balance. And a lot of the other stuff is now resolved. So we've got the loudness is there, the stereo width is kind of is sounding nice, and the resonances have been removed. So once we get the tonal balance in place, it's going to be very close.
Love it.
So let's jump into that. So here we've got bass room, and we've got this, so we've got 5 bands here. So from 0 to 20, 20 to 40 hertz, 40 to 80 hertz. You see them on the side here, 80 to 160, and 160 to 320. By keeping these bands fixed, we were able to create filters that were like super, super transparent, minimizing phase distortion and transient smearing. So perfect for mastering. And we, in the similar way of what we have here in reference with the level line, this is able to take the tonal balance of a reference track and use it as a target. So if I go to my desktop, I've got the reference track. So what I'll do is I'll load it in. I'm going to select the section that I want to analyze, and you can select multiple. You can actually add multiple reference tracks, and you can select multiple areas. But I'm just going to do this bit for now. So I click create targets, and now it's going to analyze that track. And now I'm going to play my track here. And what's going to happen is the bands are going to move into position. You see on the sides here, you got the targets have now moved into position. So what we had in the beginning was we needed to add a lot more high end and reduce the low end. But what's happened in Bas Room is it's just because it looks at the full frequency spectrum, it's suggesting that we do quite a lot of reduction in the low frequencies. I'm going to match up these bands here to what I'm seeing on the targets. And that's actually going to balance out the high frequencies as well. So we've got quite a lot of reduction there. And obviously we'll use our ears in a second to kind of make some tweaks. But I'm also seeing that this output speaker here is warning me. It's just turned orange because it's gone more than 2 decibels outside of what it was before. This little level match pointer is telling me that the sound has decreased. The audio has decreased because I've lowered the low frequencies. So now I'm going to bring up the gain here by 2.5 decibels. So when I now click bypass, I'll be able to do a fair comparison. So let's have a listen and see how that target worked for us. That's with Bas Room on. That's off. So at this point, it's really important. We've adjusted the low frequencies. Let's go back into reference and we'll compare it against the reference track, and we can make changes on the fly to see how it's now sounding. You can see the level line now is moving and showing the differences, and it's evened out a little bit more. So let's have a listen. So I'm hearing that the kick's been lost a little bit, so I'm probably going to bring up one of these bands. So I can see in the low end here, it's still pretty close, and that's kind of evened out a bit more. So that's good. And I am now going to go into Mix Room to do the same thing. Got some bands there already, but that's helpful. So let's have a look. So I'm going to load in that reference track again. Reference track. I'm going to highlight the section I want to analyze. I'm going to press play and create targets.
Are you using the same reference?
Yes.
Yeah.
So here I can add smart bands, and it's suggesting, you can see the green line is a little bit different here. The green line is the kind of curve that we're shooting for. We also have master mode master filters on here, which is basically limited to ±4 decibels. And again, that is to maintain as much of a clean sound as possible. So by minimizing the amount you're able to move the filters, we're able to keep them cleaner. So again, this just points us in the right direction. So let's have a listen compared to the reference track and see how we're getting on. It's actually still sounding quite a bit darker. So in this circumstance, because the track is trickier, I would move it into mix filter mode, so that I can add a little bit more movement to these bands to better align with the target suggestion that we have here. So here I'm just moving the bands around. I can double click to add more bands and select them, and I can change the cue. Let's have it. So now we're much closer aligned with the green target, and let's see how the gain has changed here as well. That's a lot brighter. It might be too much. So let's compare it to the reference track. That S from the vocal is definitely poking out a little bit too much, because now that we've pushed this up so much, it's become a little bit challenging. So So one of the things that we could do here is the S. Let's have a listen. If it's in the sides or the mids, if it's in either the sides or the mids, then we could isolate the EQ to be focused in the opposite, so that it kind of boosts that range without it being problematic. Let's see. So now I've just put this band to full side. Okay, so the S seems to be focused more in the mid. So if I move, so this is the good thing about Mix Room is it's a mid-side EQ, so I can change the positioning of the boost anywhere in the mid-side spectrum here. So if I focus it a little bit more in the sides, it's going to take a bit of the wind out of the sails of the mid boost, which means that the S sound that was kind of a bit too prominent can be alleviated. So let's have a listen to this. Yeah, so it's helped a little bit, but we probably have to go in and do a little bit more de-essing reduction with this particular track. So in this scenario, you could try Reso. Let's have a look for that S here. What I'm doing here is I'm using the Q to I'm using the mouse pad to adjust the Q. So I can make the Q5, I can make the Q40, whatever it needs to be. I'm going to try and find the S and try to alleviate it in the mix. So let's not dive into it too much there, but you get the kind of general idea. So I wanted to just take a second now to compare it to the original mix to see where we've taken a genuinely awful sounding mix that was completely messed up and where it is now. So let's have a listen. So that's what it was sounding like before.
Night and day.
Obviously, it's not a perfect master. It's not a perfect production in the first place. It's a good challenge, actually, to find really awful tracks and do your best to try and improve them.
I was going to ask if your client knows you're out here trying like this.
This wasn't his mix. So the original mix itself, I've messed it up a little bit. So for educational purposes, his mix was initially much better, of course. Yeah, this particular mix is part of my advanced mastering course, and it has lots of different variations of this track that you can kind of play around with to master. So there's a beginner version, an intermediate version, an expert version. I think this one is one of the really like unnecessarily difficult versions. It's like a gym to actually
Sure.
help you improve your skills with this. And it's just kind of to explain how the idea of today was to facilitate me showing you how to use those plugins to get those kind of results. And you can take this process and use it for a great sounding mix and do exactly the same thing. You find the reference track that's right for you. You knock out the resonances that need to be knocked out if there are any. You get the loudness that's right for the destination. But it's so important to keep referencing and to keep an eye on where the mix was before you started, so that as you progress through the mastering itself, you always want to make sure that you're making positive progress. So always referencing back and saying, okay, this is where the mix was, this is my reference track, this is where I am now. It just keeps you on track to make sure it's going in the right direction.
Nice. Was that it?
So what would happen next would be I'd revisit the limiter and the compression. I'd bounce it out. I'd run it through expose, and you kind of get the that's the rough idea. So I'll just export this so we can have a quick look in reference as well.
While
But
that's
if there's any
exporting,
questions,
what I like
Yeah.
every time I watch you master a track, and I've done it a few times now, is you kind of you just make it look real easy. And I think with the help of the plugins you make and just doing it a bunch of times, it really doesn't need to be like brain surgery usually. I mean, what you've just done there, it's really, really impressive. When we first listened to the track, when it was super muddy, I questioned how you would get around, the bass and the kick overlap, because it's quite a bassy kick, right? And, I would be more tempted to get into the stems and deal with it there, because it sounds like it needed it. But what you've done with just Bas Room, it really transformed it, really. Quite impressive. There's actually a question that came in. Let me try to find it.